and this was prompted by just a general conversation with a friend of mine. And I catch myself oftentimes having conversations just in life, and I'm like, well, that would make a good video topic. And most of the time, it seems like I forget about them, or that I kind of just lose sight of them, and I never actually capitalize on the potential to discuss that on video, whether it be here on Patreon or on YouTube or whatever. So, trying to get better about that. And today's discussion is going to be about selection of a defensive load for your rifle. And commonly, we think of rifles as being tools for outside of the home and stuff like that. But I want to frame this in the context of utilizing a rifle such as a bedside gun or home defense gun. It's gained popularity over the last, 10 years or so, maybe not that long. But it's gotten more popular and more common, and it's definitely become something that is accepted within the gun culture here in the United States of America. And then I think there's been multiple drivers to that, such as increased threats and a whole lot of different home invasions, and you got a whole lot of just weird stuff that happens, and a whole lot of shady characters that are looking to do evil shit. And a lot of times they link up and try to come at you in force and in numbers. So those types of situations lend themselves well to the application of something like an AR-15. You get a good amount of ammunition capacity, and obviously it's going to be better than a handgun because it's a rifle. It shoots a intermediate rifle cartridge, so it's going to be better than any handgun, terminally speaking. So with that being the case, a lot of people, I guess, will probably have questions about what the ammunition selection should be. Now, I'm not a big nerd on a lot of stuff, and ballistics are included. I know a little bit, and I've learned some. But for me, I try to keep it simple. And if you want to kind of go down the rabbit hole, you can start looking at barrel twists and stuff like that. But typically, when we're talking about within the confines of a structure, a lot of that shit is really not going to come into play. Generally, you're going to see stuff or issues and concerns arise from that kind of stuff when you're shooting at medium range and stretching on out there and stuff like that, getting into some of the longer range stuff. And also trying to combat different threats and so on and so forth. But for the sake of this conversation and keeping it to the point, let's just talk about inside of a structure. I mean, you're talking about no more than 25 yards, So for me, my number one choice, and the reason that it would be my number one choice is because it's so commonly available and it is one of the least expensive options, is going to be 55 grain ball, preferably the hotter stuff, the 556 NATO M193. It's commonly available. Pretty much everybody that owns one of these guns has M193. You can buy it pretty much everywhere, and like I said, it's loaded a little bit hotter than some of the 223 offerings, the commercial offerings will be. And the 55 grain bullet is going to do what you need it to do, even when we start getting down into some of the shorter barrel lengths. I think you're still going to be fine because it is on the lighter side as far as projectiles are concerned. So you're going to get that fragmentation and that yaw and all those different gnarly effects of the cartridge when it gets involved with something, a living creature, so to speak. And we're talking about pests of the two-legged variety, evildoers, if you will. So I think that you would be well served with something like that. I'm not saying that there aren't better options, but we also too have to be realistic, and we have to consider cost and availability and things of that nature. But the cool thing about it is, if you're just looking to have maybe a couple mags available, then you don't necessarily have to worry about stocking a whole shit pot of whatever load you do choose. Get you some, test it, run it through the gun, make sure you don't have any feeding issues or anything of that nature, and then you should be good to go. So next, for me, this is what I keep in my bedside gun. This is Hornady Critical Defense, and this is their like 73 grain FTX projectile. So it's got the flex tip technology or whatever, you know, they call it. These have been around for a while, and I got a 20 round magazine loaded with those that I keep in my 11.5 inch AR with the suppressor, my go-to rifle. So that I feel like is a good option. Also, it's a little bit heavier, but I think the FTX bullet is a solid performer, and I don't think you can go wrong with that. Some of the other offerings, the older stuff from Hornady, like the TAP and stuff like that, and then they had the TAP FPD for personal defense. I think those would be good too, but those are probably going to be a lot harder to find now. And then the next thing I have here is a Winchester 64 grain soft point. I can't remember, you know, they put some kind of cool name to it, but I can't remember what it's called. I've used this on whitetail deer and was pretty pleased with the performance of it. I could have, I mean, whitetail deer are tough animals, as you know, or may not know. I shot a doe with this at probably about 50 yards. She was quartering away from me. It went in behind her left shoulder. I mean, good shot. Right behind her left shoulder, and it exited right in between her, right in between both her shoulders at the front. Basically blew her chest out. But she was a tough gal, and she was able to run way further than I would have liked for her to run. But one thing about that was I had plenty of blood to track her. I'm talking about a lot of blood. I got at least one lung for sure. May have gotten both of them. I'm not sure. I didn't field dress the animal or anything. Kind of wish I had at this point, but I didn't. But I did have to walk my ass off and get a buddy and stuff to get to them to recover the animal. But long story short, plenty of good blood. I mean, a lot of it. Deer are very tough animals, as you know, like I said, but I don't foresee a human being, some shitbag or something that tried to break into your home and take something from you or kill you or whatever, do evil shit. I don't think that they would have stand as good a chance as what deer and some game animals sometimes do. But that aside, so the 64 grain soft point or a soft point that you can find, you know, if you can find one that's lighter, that's cool as well, because the velocity is going to be king in these guns. That's what they were designed for, was the high velocity. That's really where they derive their strength and lethality. So even a 55 grain soft point or something of that nature, even a 46 grain. I have some 46 grain tipped varmint rounds, and they're like a ballistic tip. Those would be really nice. Which brings me to my next point, which is I couldn't find my Hornady ballistic tip rounds. I couldn't find them. I looked for them, but I was unable to find them. And I wish I would have had those here. I have some that are 40 grain VMAX. That's what they are. And I think that would be a good choice. Super fast projectile. I mean, 40 grains is cooking, you know. I mean, I can't quote the velocity on that, but I would imagine that it would be, you know, pretty hot even when you start stepping down into the shorter barrels. So that would be a good choice. And if I could find them, then it would probably have been somewhere closer to the beginning of my conversation. But the VMAX stuff is good because those things tend to fragment pretty rapidly upon impact. So I think that would be something that would serve you well also. And then last, which is not a choice that I would pick for home defense necessarily, is the M855, which is the green tip with the the mild steel penetrator. It's basically a round that was designed for a little bit more enhanced penetration through intermediate barriers, car doors, auto glass, different things like that, with infantry and soldiers in mind. Definitely an advocate of having some, especially when you look at the activities of the government in years past where they wanted to ban it and stuff like that, and then the prices went up to $1 a round, even for a case of 1,000 in bulk. So if nothing else, that right there is kind of a red flag for me that I need some of this shit in stock, and I keep some. And I think that in different environments, it may be desirable, but inside of the home, it would probably be my last choice, just due to its propensity to want to over penetrate more than what we're really looking for. And then I think, just to tie this conversation together, it would be a good idea to have a discussion about handguns, which is more common for home defense guns. And I've seen handgun rounds go through a lot of drywall, sheetrock, and stuff like that. Now, the case that I'm talking about, it was Full Metal Jacket 40 cal rounds. Now, obviously, they were ripping through. It was a bad scenario, I can tell you that. But that aside, even with a lot of the jacketed hollow point rounds, you have to, the way that pistol jacketed hollow points are constructed, they have that large cavity. Typically, we see those have a tendency to clog. And when they do get clogged up from whatever, whether it be sheetrock or denim or fabric or anything of that nature, they tend to perform from that point on as a full metal jacket anyway. So you kind of got to look at it and just kind of weigh your options there. The trade-off that you're basically what you're giving up in power and velocity and stuff like that, and even ammo capacity with a 20 or a 30 round magazine and something like this, it may be something that you at least want to evaluate. And there's videos and stuff like that you can find on YouTube and stuff that will show you people that have found abandoned structures and stuff like that and been able to shoot through them, and they have simulated structures and things of that nature and shot through them. That seems like a really cool test. I've never done it, but I would like to. But I have watched many of those videos and I have learned some stuff from that. So you take that for what it's worth. The next thing that I would like to discuss is shotguns. Shotguns for home defense. We all know it's undoubtable that like 12 gauge shotguns and stuff with the right load are just absolutely devastating at close range. Like double-aught buck, for instance, comes to mind as the number one. But in a home defense scenario, we still see these rounds penetrate through modern American construction, because modern American construction is really just typically not all that great. I mean, it's sheetrock, drywall, whatever, and 2x4s, and then you got some vinyl siding on the outer layer. So it's not like we're talking about something that's super robust anyway. So pretty much I think that the consensus is no matter what it is, it has the tendency to penetrate through different walls and stuff like that within American construction, residential construction. So that I don't think you're going to find something that's just not going to penetrate through it at all, unless you start maybe looking at frangibles. And I even think that probably then you're still going to see some penetration through certain barriers such as drywall and stuff like that. But I don't know for sure. That's not something that I've ever dealt with. But the 12 gauge too, the other drawback to that in my mind is, some people say, well, I'll just put birdshot in it. Well, birdshot may or may not get the job done when you're actually hitting whoever the aggressor may be that is unlawfully entered your home to do harm to you and your loved ones. So that's not a risk that we can take. We need to incapacitate the individual and so that we can stop the threat immediately. So birdshot is not a contender really in my mind to that. It's not a starter is what I'm trying to say. So if we take that off the table, let's look at, and not to mention just the sheer amount of projectiles that you're blasting off. And then we look at double aught buck. We know double aught buck is an effective cartridge in the 12 gauge variety, but every time you squeeze the trigger, you're turning loose 9 to 12 pellets. So every time you squeeze the trigger, you got that many more projectiles leaving the muzzle of your firearm, and you're responsible for every one of them. Nothing's changed. You're still responsible for every projectile that leaves the muzzle of your firearm. So now you squeeze the trigger one time and you put off 9 pellets of double aught buck. You are 100% accountable for where each and every one of those stops. So that's a drawback to me when we're talking about a home defense scenario or something like that. Now, a lot of this is going to be situationally dependent based on where you may live and stuff like that. You know, if you live in an apartment, then you got a whole other list of considerations that you probably really need to do a deep dive and do some study. And maybe frangibles are the way, and that's something that you may need to look into. But if you're just in a regular home environment in the suburbs or something like that, and you have neighbors, again, that's still another level that you need to assess personally and individually. Now, if you're living out in the country or something like that, and your nearest neighbor is, 300 yards away or something and over a hill, then now these concerns are pretty much, they're starting to become more non-existent. That, you're not really necessarily going to be worried about that. Especially if you don't have family, or if you live in a house by yourself, then it's not really necessarily a big, huge deal. It's still a concern because, as I said, you're responsible for every projectile. You're accountable for that. But, you got a much larger buffer zone between you and any sort of a potential non-combatant, for the most part, as well as you can tell. So those are all things that you're going to have to assess individually based on where you're living and what kind of environment that you may be in at whatever point in time. So that's kind of my thoughts on the 12 gauge and stuff like that inside of structures when we have to be accountable for every time we squeeze that trigger. The next thing that I would like to mention before we close about the 55 grain M193 is that it has been known to penetrate level 3 body armor, level 3 rifle rated body armor. Especially I've seen multiple accounts with steel armor and stuff of that nature where M193 with the longer barrel rifles, 16, especially when you start getting into the 20-inch barrels and stuff like that, you can almost bet that stuff will penetrate level 3 body armor. So that is another, I guess you could say, feather in the M193's cap. So, and which is somewhat baffles the internet to this day, because people will think, oh, well, the M855 is going to penetrate it, but it's heavier, thereby it's slower. So a lot of times it won't penetrate something like a level 3 plate. But the faster, lighter 55 grain M193, I've seen it before in videos, not firsthand, but I've seen countless videos where it has penetrated level 3 armor. So that is another thing that you could potentially view as a benefit to the 55 grain M193 FMJ. So I hope this was helpful and informative and maybe eye-opening to you guys. And let me know what kind of feedback you have for me. And I'm going to do some more studying. As always, I'm always learning and growing. And sometimes I get new information that may change a previous opinion to just like anybody else. But as of right now, I just want to share the information that I have available to me. And I want to share that with you guys. So let me know what you think about it. And I will see y'all soon. I'm out of here.